Good evening, Democrats. My name is Renee Hoyos. I'm going to be your host this evening, and our guest tonight is Dr. Stephen Smith, the Executive Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. And tonight we are going to stitch together for you in a half an hour a story about our local utility district, the Knoxville Utility Board, our regional utility, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and how they are working together to maybe not help us solve our climate crisis. So, Steve, thank you so much for being on today. You've had a long and illustrious career with TVA, and I'd like you to get us started off with a little explanation about the relationship between KUB and TVA and some of the recent developments around the lease and their gas program.
Yeah, well, thanks, Renee, and thanks everybody for joining. So the Tennessee Valley Authority is kind of a unicorn in the sense that it is a federal monopoly that is self-regulated, meaning its board of directors regulated. Every other utility around the Southeast that we work with, Duke Energy, Southern Company, Florida Power and Light, they actually have an independent state regulator that oversees them. TVA doesn't have that. And therefore, TVA is self-regulated as a federal entity, and they're a monopoly because they have a monopoly service territory. That monopoly includes the areas that include Knoxville and basically touch 7 southeastern states. Knoxville Utility Board is one of 153 local power companies that are currently receiving electric power from the Tennessee Valley Authority. So it's like a wholesale to a retail relationship. And all of us as KUB customers, we pay KUB, but the electrons are generated largely by the Tennessee Valley Authority. KUB recently gave up a lot of power and leverage that they had in the relationship with TVA by signing a 20-year contract. They were on a shorter time period, 10 years, and they could have kept to that shorter contract, but TVA wanted them to extend the contract. And this contract isn't like you sign it on 2020 and it's over in 2030. It renews every single day another 20 years. So it's an evergreen contract. So
I didn't know that part of the story. Yes. So this could go on forever.
Every day it renews for another 20 years, unless KUB sends a notice saying, we're going to leave in 20 years. So it's a very asymmetric type of contract relationship. We have been discouraging KUB from doing that as part of the reason that we started the group that some may be aware of called Act on KUB, where we were trying to get KUB to develop some independence, and we're trying to get a new set of board members and other policies implemented. We can talk about that. But the point I'm making here is that TVA and KUB are attached to the hip on the electric side very, very tightly. And when we're looking at solving the climate crisis, because here we are this summer, we've seen the world on fire, literally, Siberia, Southern Europe, Turkey, the Western United States. We've seen devastating fires across the globe. We've seen extreme weather, climate disruption. We've got to do something about this. The federal government under the Biden administration appears to be poised to want to do something. Obviously, Biden is re-engaged with the international community, but we now have this infrastructure bill that is being debated and will likely pass later in September. And these have some important elements. The Tennessee Valley Authority, which is an extension of the administration, the President of the United States appoints the 9-member board of TVA, and that 9-member board is in effect the regulator of TVA. Biden has nominated 4 people, but none of them have been confirmed yet, but they should be soon. TVA has not adopted the same climate policy that the Biden administration has. Biden wants to see the whole electric sector decarbonized by 2035. TVA is making progress. They've retired a lot of coal plants, but they're also now still thinking about building more fossil plants, gas plants, in the footprint of some of their retired coal plants. And they have not agreed to the same timetable as the Biden administration is pushing as far as being decarbonized by 2035. Our organization has actually asked for TVA to get there quicker. We believe they can. We published a report that shows that they could get there by 2030. And we believe as an extension of the administration, TVA should be leading by example. How does this affect KUB? Well, KUB gets all their power from TVA. So therefore, what TVA does, effectively KUB does. And again, KUB lost some of their leverage by signing this long-term contract. There's some good things that KUB can do, and we can get into that. But I think it's important that people understand that at this moment that we're trying to solve the climate crisis, we have to think about KUB and TVA as one entity, and we've got to think about how do we, as customers of KUB, put pressure and hold KUB accountable, and then also hold TVA accountable.
Yeah, well, I've had some experience holding KUB accountable. When I got here in 2003, I was with the Tennessee Clean Water Network, and we were engaged in a lawsuit around sewage treatment plant and over 1,000 violations of the Clean Water Act over a 3-year period. It was pretty messy here. Every time it rained, the manholes would pop. And so we sued in federal court. We won a consent decree. And my experience with them was that they cleaned up in 10 years. They did a couple of additional projects they didn't have to do. They were pretty good to work with, and they did not file an extension for the consent decree except for these 2 experimental projects. Such a difference when you have the feds breathing down your neck than when you have these voluntary programs. And it's kind of disappointing because I saw them work really hard to complete the work and do it well and do it on time, sometimes earlier. And to know now that they've sort of slipped away from that is really disappointing to hear, because we know they could be more aggressive on this issue if they wanted to be.
Well, and your story is a great one, and kudos to all the good work that went on there. And as we were talking about earlier, the key difference was that once y'all filed the lawsuit and triggered the federal enforcement, you actually had someone who was carrying a pretty big stick to hold KUB accountable. In this case, the entity that holds the big stick, TVA, and EPA could come in at some point, although EPA is not enforcing climate rules because the previous administration sort of shot that down. But TVA could be doing more. KUB could be doing more. There are things that they could be doing, but there's nobody with the big stick. And this is where citizen engagement is so important, because we have got to get board members on the KUB board. We've got to get board members on the TVA board that are actually going to prioritize the climate crisis, the climate disruption as a priority, and actually do more than just the kind of feel good things. Now, let's give credit where credit is due. KUB has participated and has engaged in some activities that are climate friendly. They've recently signed on to a TVA program where they're building solar plants down in Mississippi. The attributes associated with those plants are being applied in Knoxville. It's a complex sort of way to sort of think about it, but there is solar being built. And in theory, that solar will represent up to roughly 20% of KUB's electric use based on these, what's called Green Invest and these solar programs. I don't want to be overly critical of that. We obviously think that those things should have been built more locally, but they are being built. KUB is participating in the discussions with the Mayor's Climate Council that I participate on. India Concannon has kept leaning into some of the climate things that we're doing. The city council has some goals. Those goals are not aggressive enough to where we need to be, but they are in line with where many cities are in the Southeast. What is missing is that you have, again, the federal entity that is supplying all of our electricity, not lining up with the administration. Then that's just on the electric side. Then KUB is actually promoting gas for home cooking and heating and everything. And those of us who have really given a lot of thought about this and where the science is going is we realize that we've got to discontinue burning any fossil fuels. So that means even in residential home use, so for cooking and for heating, we eventually need to go all electric. That's going to take some time. On this advisory board that we're on with KUB, we have brought up, have you been thinking about your gas infrastructure and having a long-range plan to start to disengage that? The answer is no. They don't have a plan to do that. Matter of fact, they're actually promoting more gas. And so that's at the local level that we've got to get a handle on. And then at the federal, at the TVA level, TVA is retiring. They're looking at retiring Kingston, the plant that had the big coal ash spill. They're also looking at retiring their largest coal unit over near Clarksville. But in the footprint of both of those, they're actually talking about building natural gas plants, which are fossil fuel. So these are problematic. And this is where we've got to get people in the board leadership at KUB and in the TVA board leadership. And we as engaged citizens and ratepayers and customers need to raise our voice that we've got to get off carbon altogether. We can't be doing this. And so even though there are some window dressing things and some positive things, and we've given TVA and KUB credit for the little bit that they're doing, they're not responding to the measure of the crisis.
Yeah, that's really disappointing, as you spoke of earlier, with wildfires and hurricanes, and where the planet is warming exponentially at this point, and we need to do everything we can to get off of fossil fuels. What kinds of things can folks do? I know that the board, KUB board, I believe turns over its members every 6 years, 8 years.
No, so when we ran the act on KUB, every year the mayor has an opportunity to appoint a new board member. Unfortunately, the board terms were for 7 years and they could be renewed. So you could be on the KUB board for 14 years, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And there have been people that have been on for quite a long time. Through some activism and through trying to get actually a referendum on the ballot for citizens to vote in the last election, the mayor, Kincannon, agreed that she would not appoint somebody for 2-year terms. She would only appoint one. So every September, KUB solicits from the community a slate of candidates. And then we have been working with the mayor's office to do a couple of things. One, make sure that there are some good low-income candidates that are getting on the board, because part of our struggle with KUB has been around rate structure and fixed fees. We ran the campaign, freeze the fees, so that because they were incrementally moving up your fixed fees every year on your bill, to where now you're paying north of $20 a month, whether you even flip your light switch on or not. We were successful in getting KUB to do a temporary freeze on the fees for a couple of years. But we felt like in that debate, there wasn't enough representation from the low-income community. So KUB has developed some more sensitivity there, and they're looking at it, and the mayor is working with us. The other thing, though, is we really don't have any strong environmental representatives on the KUB board, and that's another angle and another dimension that needs to be brought up. And so we are looking, again, we're coming up for the nomination process for this year, early September, and we're asking people, you can go to the KUB website, and there's a place there if you want to put your name in the hat, and that's a possibility. So that's part of it. Let's get good leaders. Mm-hmm. But people can actually come to the KUB board meetings and speak up, and people can actually communicate with KUB representatives and our elected officials, city council in particular, because KUB is in essence a part of city government, even though they've tried to wall it off a little bit. They are still part of the city charter and part of city government. So people need to speak up. People need to make personal choices. About how you use your energy. That is very important. If you can be thinking about, if you're replacing appliances, be thinking about going all electric as opposed to using gas appliances, because any gas appliance is, sort of part of the problem. And then groups like ourselves, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, you can see us at cleanenergy.org. There's other groups that are doing good advocacy around climate change in the community. We need people to speak up, because Knoxville is a very important part of the whole ecosystem here in East Tennessee, but we're also leading in some ways other urban areas in Tennessee about setting goals about carbon reduction. And we need to continue to lean into those goals and hold the city government and KUB's leadership accountable.
Great. There's some great suggestions there. So sign up to become a board member. I believe the board meetings are monthly. They meet at noon at the downtown office.
Right.
Contact your representatives on city council and get them to, the board meetings are held on the third Thursday of every month. So it's a monthly meeting. They're an hour. I think there's a luncheon first. So you get a meal and then you get a board meeting.
Well, they don't let you eat. Let me, this is what.
Oh, do they not anymore? They used to have a big luncheon before their meeting.
Yeah. Well, you actually can go down and attend the board meeting on the third Thursday of the month. But then what happens is they then go into the room next door and they eat. Now you can stand around the walls and watch the board members eat if you want to, but it's, they're not going to actually feed you, but.
Oh no, they will. Just the board members. If you're a board member, you get a lunch. That's right. Okay. I thought they had discontinued that. And, I can't remember, are they still putting their meetings on CTV? They had to do that for a while under the Ash administration. Last time I was there, they weren't.
They are. And
they are? Okay.
We've been working with them to actually make even more real-time access because that was one of the requests that we had. So KUB has been doing some things to try to be more responsive, and I think they deserve credit. I don't want to just bash KUB on all fronts. I think that the problem is, though, there's the sort of superficial things that are sort of easy feel-good things. Like they set up this advisory board. Okay, look, I love being on the advisory board, but the reality is anytime there's trouble in the community, they did it with y'all, they did it with the concerns about trees. They've now done it with this. They sort of create this little box and they put the folks that are troublemakers in the box, and then they sort of mix them in with a bunch of other folks that are going to sort of go along and get along. And then, it's a way of just sort of managing stuff. We'll see how it goes. I mean, we're in the early phases of that, and we're starting to bring up some issues in the advisory committee that get at the root of some of these underlying things. But I'm not sure the KUB their leadership is configured in such a way that they are prioritizing the climate crisis to the level of the problem. I mean, that's globally is a problem. I mean, we as a species are disrupting the whole ecosystem and creating distortions that are going to be extraordinarily difficult to manage. And we're seeing it play out as we've talked about. And we're not responding on the order of magnitude that we have to. And so we've got to raise our voices to all leadership. But again, where the carbon is coming from is how we choose to, produce and consume energy. And a lot of that is at the utility. Now, the other place that's happening is with electric vehicles. KUB is starting to sort of inch their way in there a little bit, but they're not as aggressive as they need to be because we need to electrify, again, everything. That includes not only your stove and your hot water heater and other things like that, but it also means your car. And you're going to end up now, KUB is going to become your filling station to some degree, because as we go to electric vehicles, and electric vehicles now have even overtaken the utility sector in carbon emissions. So we need KUB and TVA to lean more into that. This is why KUB is becoming absolutely critical to solving the climate crisis at the local level, and then TVA at the regional level, because as we electrify everything, the choices we make are critical. And that's now going to be not only in buildings and how we heat and cool our homes, how we cook, but now it's also going to be in mobility. And so this is the phenomenal opportunity we have, but we've got to have leadership and we've got to have an engaged citizenry that is actually holding our leaders and our utilities. That utility belongs to us. KUB does not belong to shareholders. It is a city-owned entity, which means that every citizen of Knoxville is in essence, a part owner. as it's a public power. And so we've got to raise our voices and be engaged in this.
And it seems like a double whammy is happening here in the South, because TVA, I believe, is the largest utility in the country, is it not?
They are the largest public power entity, and they're in the top 3 or 4 as far as utilities. But like Duke Energy is the, over in North Carolina, and they go up into Indiana and down all the way down into Florida. You've got Southern Company. We've got some big ones in the region. But TVA is critically important. And what makes TVA unique is they're not beholden to shareholders. Again, they belong to all of us. They are an extension of the administration. So this is what is so maddening about the fact that TVA's current leadership is not aligning itself with the goals of the Biden administration to decarbonize as quickly as we need them to decarbonize. And, they're doing some good things, but they're not, the fact that they're still flirting with natural gas, the fact that they're not setting goals that are on the same timeline as the Biden administration. So Biden is now appointed 4. They haven't been confirmed, but they soon shall be. And now we're going to need to see that change start to happen, because we've got to get on with this, because unfortunately, every day we're seeing more and more dramatic impacts from this climate disruption.
Now, why do you suppose they're not embracing the Biden agenda, TVA?
Well, first of all, the leadership, not the board, but the staff leadership, I think, are not bought into climate change at the level they need to be. They're not bought into renewables, they're not bought into energy efficiency. And so therefore, they're slow walking, and they're embracing past decisions they've made around coal plants and gas plants. They are, unfortunately, they're very, very bullish on what are called small modular reactors, which is a new, unproven technology that Oak Ridge is flirting with. And so they're kind of starting to put all their eggs in that basket and saying, look, the way we're going to solve the climate crisis is to build these small modular reactors. But they're not going to come on in the time frame necessary. They're unproven. I'm happy for them to do research and everything. Climate crisis is serious stuff. We've got to look at everything. But there are concrete things they can be doing today, which is deploying more renewable energy. TVA is a laggard in the Southeast in deploying solar power. They have pretty much gutted most of their really good energy efficiency programs that help people squeeze more work out of each kilowatt hour. So these are the kind of things that you can do immediately instead of hanging your hopes on future technologies that may or may not manifest and be useful. But most importantly, they can retire their coal plants faster, and they don't need to be going to, in the same footprint, be putting more natural gas plants, because natural gas sounds like really a nice thing, but it's still fossil fuels. It's not quite as much carbon as coal. It's not as bad as coal, but it still adds carbon to the atmosphere. And we've already overshot what the atmosphere needs to be able to sort of manage and get our climate back in alignment to where we aren't having these extreme events.
Do you think that's possible? Do you think we can get our climate back into alignment and not have these extreme events?
I actually do. I mean, I've studied the science. I believe that it's possible. I don't believe that we are on the sort of configuration, call it the war footing or whatever we need to call it, to get us there yet. I think some of the things that are being talked about in the infrastructure plan that will hopefully pass this fall begin to move us more in that direction. I think certainly the Biden administration has been a blessing compared to what we had previously on so many levels, but on climate for sure. Mm-hmm. And so I remain optimistic, but I'm telling you that time is running out. It is not a scare tactic. I mean, there is only so much that the natural atmosphere of the Earth can hold without you. As you load more energy into the atmosphere, you see these like what we saw in Waverly, Tennessee, just in the past few weeks. What was it? 18 inches or something like that in a matter of hours. You saw Hurricane Ida go from a Cat 1 to a Cat almost 5 in just less than 2 days. You are seeing this is energy in the atmosphere from the heating, and that creates. You can have extreme rain in some areas, but you can also have devastating droughts. As I was out in California earlier this summer, literally 109 degrees in the Central Valley. I've never experienced a temperature like that. And, in some places it was getting over 130. The fires are just, they're, apocalyptic. I mean, they're just, you've never seen anything like it. So we can't just wish this away. We have got to take definitive actions. The science is there. It's very similar to COVID. We know what we need to do. We need to execute on it, and we need to trust that as we implement the measures necessary, we can begin to sort of pull ourselves back from the brink. But we've got to move. And this is what is so frustrating about the bureaucratic malaise that you find at both KUB and at TVA. And everybody there is talking about, well, yeah, maybe we need to do something about gas, but when are we going to do that? And they're almost kicking the can down the road. And that's the problem. We've been kicking the can down the road for decades, and we're now at this moment of it's now or never.
Wow. That is such a compelling story, and a reason for folks in the KUB area to start making some phone calls and talking to your representatives and talking to KUB too. You can go to the meetings.
Track with us. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, cleanenergy.org. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of issues we work on, renewables, energy efficiency, electrification of transportation, trying to shut these coal plants down, blocking new gas plants and other things like that. But ultimately, everything is sort of a metric of how do we get more carbon out of the atmosphere, because that is really the metric that we need to keep our eyes on. The eyes on the prize is, are we reducing carbon? And now we've made progress. SACE for a long time has been on TVA's case. We've made progress because TVA has reduced their overall carbon emissions, but now they're sort of plateauing out. They've got to keep going down. But now we've got to really figure out the transportation sector. And now that becomes an interface between utility and transportation, because we're going to be plugging our cars into the grid, cars and trucks and buses and all these other things. So it makes the utilities even more important as part of the solution. But we've got to get the leadership that really understands the magnitude of the problem. Yeah, wow. Well, it's too bad that we're here. It seems like all the evidence is pointing to, a decarbonized future. I know that the state did not spend its VW monies all that well. We lost some opportunities there, and we can't continue to lose these opportunities as time goes on, because as you said, the climate crisis is upon us. And we need to act now. We've needed to act for the last 30 years, but, we like to wait until the very end, test is tomorrow. I think this is when I'm going to study. So, well, Stephen, thank you so much. I think this has been really informative. And I think I know I learned something about that 20-year contract that was stunning. Thank you so much for all the work you do. And folks, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy is a membership organization. Please do your duty, become a member today, and support the great work of this organization. Thanks so much. Thank you, Renee. Thanks everybody for watching.